all for inviting me to speak this morning. I feel really honoured and looking at some of the images and women downstairs. I think this is little old me just talking to you, but I will talk through how I've got to be here as Chief Exec of the Royal. I'm really, really proud to hold that job. I consider it a real privilege to be the Chief Exec. And although I'm new, and I do use that and try and get away with that when it suits, I feel like I've been here for ages, and that's a real credit to all my staff at the Royal and all the partners that I work with across the system who've made me feel at home. And actually I do feel at home. I was born near Gainsborough, and I'm living back at home, which to some people in Chesterfield, that's miles away. And do I really drive an hour every day? And I promise I don't speed. But I do feel so very much at home in this town now, and it's nice to be back living locally. I can talk forever, so I'm going to ask someone just give me a 2-minute warning to make sure I don't go over 20 minutes. There's no clock here. And I'm just going to talk through how I've got to here, and was asked to talk about some of the challenges. And I thought about that last week, and I thought, I don't really see them as challenges. I've always been really driven to improve care for patients since I was a little girl. But one of my male colleagues, Chief Exec, said to me, when I was saying what I was doing today, he said, well, you may not see them as challenges, but you're a woman and you've got on successfully in your career. He said, I'm a white middle-aged man and I don't know what it's like to be a woman. So please do tell your story. I was testing a couple of them out on him because he said that helps everyone understand what it is like to be a woman and what it's like to succeed in your career when you really keep focused on what's important to you. So I thought about what was my first challenge, and actually my first challenge was how I wanted to do the job I wanted to do, and actually my first ambition was to be a plumber. My dad set up his own business in Gainsborough and ran it successfully, and I used to love going out on a Saturday morning and unblocking drains with him, and that was my passion. And probably because we used to talk football, interesting to learn about the first women's team. I'm a man in red, so Dad really inspired me to be successful and to do what you want to do. But he did point out that in the 1970s, being a plumber wasn't a job for a woman. I did remind him a few years later that if he'd let me pursue my career, I could have been that first pink plumber who set up her own successful business. But anyway, I then decided, aged 8 or 9, that I was going to be a nurse. And when I asked Mum, not that long ago, why did I want to be a nurse? She said, haven't a clue. No one in our family was medical. Didn't know any nurses, but she said you were always looking after people, whether it was your dolls, the family, your friends. My brother says it's because I was bossy, but whatever it was, I wanted to nurse. And I remember a challenge from my German teacher at O-level-ish level, saying you're going to be wasted on nursing, was his words, and I can still hear those. And I looked at him and said, why? You need to be doing a degree. In those days, I think there was one place that did a degree nursing course, so I was going to do my traditional training. And I thought, I'll prove you wrong. So off I went to Adam Brooks, which at the time was held to be one of the best training hospitals. Mum thought it was because it was the furthest away of all the ones that I had an offer from. And having been brought up, for anyone that knows Corringham near Gainsborough, it's Diddy. There was one bus a week, so off I went to Cambridge. I thought I was going to this huge metropolis, and I loved my training and had just over 3 years there. Got my first job in urology, so I did point out to Dad that, you see, I'm a plumber. Human pipes, copper and plastic ones. And I did 6 months as a urology nurse. But my passion was really gynae. I'd had a lot of issues with my periods as a teenager, and I had quite bad PMS, both as a teenager and through my training. And I decided I'd put that to good effect. And I did gynae nursing then. I ran my own PMS clinic at one point in my career. I did an interview on Radio Cambridgeshire about how women should fight for getting treatment for PMS again in the 80s. It was something you didn't really talk about. And when I look back now, I hope Radio Cambridge still haven't got that recording, but I think, what was I doing? And there I was with my earphones talking about PMS. And so I decided I'd go to do the gynae course, which the only places that did it at the time were London or Birmingham. And I chose London, and I was going for 6 months to do a gynae course, and then I was going to come back up to Lincolnshire. I'd met my partner at the time, and he was local. And 14 years later, I was still in London. I fell in love with London as a 22-year-old, and loved the life down there, and the opportunities that it gave me in my career, because you could move around hospitals and progress and still live in the same place. I was really privileged to work at the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson Hospital for Women, which anyone that knows where it was on Euston Road is now the Unison building. So my nursing home room is their head office, but the original hospital is still there, and the Elizabeth Garrett Museum is there. And it wasn't that long before I arrived in 1990 that they'd just allowed male consultants and doctors into the building. So it was all women up until that time. And I love the experience that I got at that hospital, and the confidence it gave me to pursue my career. I then realised, and I'd never tell my German teacher, but you did need a degree to progress. So I started to study in the evenings, so I used to do an early shift on a Tuesday, Thursday, and then I would go to North London Polytechnic and do an evening class, and started my degree. I had 18 months off where I went to train as a midwife and delivered babies for 6 months, and then thought, no, I miss my gynae. So I went back to gynae, finished my degree, and worked my way up the ladder to be a sister, because we still called them sisters in those days. And I was one of the youngest sisters at the time. I was 27 when I got my sister's job at the Whittington Hospital in North London. And again, loved my job, my ward, as I always felt it was, and my team and my ladies. And it was in the days when a lot of gynae patients still actually stayed in hospital. It's very rare to see many of our gynae patients now stay in. But I ran my ward for a couple of years. During my degree, I'd got quite interested in the management side. It was in the GP fund holding days, for anyone that can remember those. And I decided, I used to get frustrated going on a shift where it was a clinical shift and getting drawn into the management side, and then thinking I was doing a management day and having to put my uniform on because we were short-staffed. And that challenge of doing both, I thought, I'm going to do one or the other. I always say I was never a nursey nurse. My dad, when I looked after him, I don't know how you were ever a nurse. Dad, I do some field work, I don't do it at home. And I decided that I'd pursue the management career. And 2 years later realised that I hadn't renewed my PIN. It was in the days where you had to actually send a cheque off to the National Nursing Council, and they confirmed that you were still registered. I'd moved flat, so the letter hadn't got to me, but subconsciously I clearly didn't see myself as a nurse anymore, and I went into the management world. I did a part-time MBA at Kingston University, and I specifically chose that programme because it was very finance focused. I was the only public sector person on the course, and wanted the challenge of an area that as a nurse, I look back now, I've never actually seen a budget. I used to run a ward and didn't have a clue. So I got an understanding of the finance world, finished my MBA and did a couple of management jobs in hospitals in London. I then remember coming in, I was still working in the women's health world, so I was the general manager at Guy's and St Thomas's in women's services, and then head of midwifery. We used to come in and just criticise everything and everyone and the NHS and the politics. And I remember looking at her one day and thought, I don't want to end up being cynical like that. I love my job. Why are you being so negative? So I thought, let me go and work somewhere else for a while. I've got my MBA. I should have these transferable skills. And I went to the private sector. I kept the connection because I went to work for a drug company called Novartis, who had a head office in London. It all sounded very glam. Our head office was in Switzerland. So once a month I used to fly out to Switzerland. They said to me, do you want to do a business continuity course? I thought, that sounds boring. They said, do you want to go to Florida or Kuala Lumpur? I thought, that sounds interesting. I went to Kuala Lumpur for 5 days. But after 18 months, I'll be honest, I was bored. And actually what really drove me back to my passion was that it felt like all they focused on was their performance-related pay, not getting a drug to market to improve care for patients. I'm sure there was something in that somewhere. And working for a Swiss company, a very male-dominated, borderline sexist company, as I perceived them in the early 2000s, and thought this just isn't for me. And fundamentally, I missed working with patients. And I remember going back to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital for a conference with my Novartis colleagues and literally walking in the door and thought, God, I miss this. So I applied back to work in the NHS, and I went to work at the Royal National Throat, Nose and Ear Hospital on Gray's Inn Road, which again, if you know that building, a real traditional old building, which had its challenges, because I swear the theatres had been built in 19-something and were still functioning. And I didn't know when I applied, but soon after I got there, they told me I was the first woman general manager to work at the RNTNE, which I didn't really think anything of. But one of the professors a few months later came to me and he said, I was a bit worried when they told me a woman was coming to do the job. I said, oh, that's that, David. And he said, well, your predecessors, if I had a problem with them, he said, I just used to take them down to the car park and threaten them. And he said, well, I wasn't sure I was going to do that with you. He said, thankfully, he said, you know, you say it how it is, you understand what we need to do, and if we have our differences, we just talk them through, don't we, and work it through. And I said, yeah, that is good, David. And I said, I'm glad you feel like that, and I think it's good, because you haven't seen my right hook. So I worked for a couple of years at the RNTNE and then decided that I wanted to come back home, so we moved back to Lincolnshire and back, ironically, to the village I grew up in, built our own house, and I worked for Northern Lincolnshire and Gould Trust for 10 years, which was, I see your face, that was a challenge, it was. And I remember again, soon after I got there, apparently word had gone round that this woman from London was applying for a job, and the one that really made me swallow, Angie, do you know, at interview she wore a pink suit. And I said, actually, it was blush, it wasn't pink. And I didn't think to question, did they ask what my two male other candidates' suits were wearing. They were grey, nothing against grey suits, but so that, again, having worked and lived in London for 14 years, I'm thinking, blimey, you know, I've come back to Lincolnshire, and is it really like this? And I, again, remember a comment from one of the directors saying, oh, I didn't realise you were a nurse, and he was a nurse by background, and feeling very proud, because actually I'd succeeded as a manager if he didn't realise I was a nurse. And then I continued to progress up the ladder, so clearly they did value my contribution and a woman's contribution, because it was a board director post that I then got in that organisation. And I moved to Liverpool, nothing to do with the football. My dad thought I'd only gone to support my team, but I did 5 years in Liverpool then to get experience in a different organisation as a director, so that I could realise my ambition to be a chief exec. And I started applying for jobs, chief exec jobs, and wasn't being successful. At the time I thought, you know, what am I doing wrong? Everybody was giving me good feedback and saying, you will be a chief exec, you know, keep going. And so I did, and I then had what I refer to my annus horribilis in 2018. So I lost my dad very unexpectedly in March, which hit me very hard. And then 3 months later, my partner of 31 years walked out on me. So it was a challenging year, and I had 2 interviews for chief exec jobs. And I look back now and think, why the heck did I apply for them then? But I did, on my mission. And that was during 2018, and I got to November, and it really did hit me. I've got some amazing family and friends who supported me through that. And the thing that I realised, and that turning point, that pivotal point that you asked me about in my career, was realising that actually, if I'm me, and I'm Angie, that nurse that trained and loved her career, Angie, that person who actually was quite happy for a few months being on her own, having never really lived on my own and done my own thing, and got my confidence as a person, I can be that successful leader in my workplace. And the conscious decision not to apply for a job last March, when everybody said to me, well, that one's definitely yours, it's got your name on it, was actually a really important point for me to think, no, this one doesn't feel right. I'll do what I want to do, not what everyone else is telling me. The interview was on the day, the anniversary that I would have lost Dad, and I thought, something's telling me this isn't right. But it's the first time I'd almost stopped and thought, no, I'm going to do what's right for me. And brilliantly, I then saw the Chesterfield job. So, as Harry says, the stars all aligned. I felt this was the one for me. I could come back home, and I realised how important it is to be with your family. Much as I love Liverpool, and nothing to do with my 5 years there, the greatest moment of actually achieving a merger of two hospitals that have tried to merge for 20 years. My greatest moment was meeting Kenny Dalglish. Marina was with him, and I had to say, I was going to marry Kenny when I was it got in the way. So I love my career, and now, and say really, I'm here, loving it, enjoying it, because I'm me. Yes, I'm chief exec, yes, I'm nurse, yes, I'm midwife, and some of the things that struck me when I first arrived, everybody saying, well, you're the nurse, aren't you? And you're the midwife, which is really scary. And interestingly, a few people said, and you're a woman. At which point I feel like going like this. But obviously the last 3 chief execs at Chesterfield have been men. So people perceive that I will be different, but actually I'm just being me. It seems to be working so far. And if I don't make a difference, I've been told I can stay for a long time, so that's great. Thank you. Make sure the NHSI and my boss knows that, but I want to stay here. I'm absolutely loving my job, and if I don't do anything else in the next few years that I am here, I know I've made a difference to one woman in my organisation who stopped me in the corridor last week and said, Angie, I listened to what you said and I've done what you said. What did I say? And she said, you said to just sparkle, be proud, be you, and if you want to do something, just stick to your guns and you will get there. And she said, and I've applied for the job, and she said, and I've got it. And I said, oh great, and I said, you're not leaving the hospital, are you? Sent her out, but no, she's going to a different role in the hospital. But she was so pleased, and I was just so touched that she stopped to say that I'd helped her achieve that. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to take questions later.